Our planet's orbital stability is not a permanent fixture. It only appears that way from our fleeting human perspective. The systems that govern our world, from the tides to the seasons, operate on a delicate balance we assume is unbreakable. If that balance were to be fundamentally altered, not by a distant asteroid or an internal geological shift, but by the sudden appearance of a colossal structure in our immediate celestial neighborhood, the consequences would be immediate and irreversible. The introduction of a ring system around Earth, similar to Saturn's, would not be a slow, creeping change. It would instantly rewrite the rules of our sky, and by extension, the rules of life on the surface below, impacting everything from global communications to the very rhythm of day and night. The initial and most jarring alteration would affect three fundamental systems we rely on implicitly. First, our satellite infrastructure, the invisible backbone of the modern world, would be placed in immediate jeopardy. Second, the planet's energy balance, the carefully regulated system that dictates our climate zones and weather patterns, would be thrown into disarray by a massive new source of shadow and reflected light. Finally, the ancient and predictable patterns of agriculture, which have been the foundation of civilization for millennia, would face an unprecedented disruption. These are not distant, theoretical problems. They are immediate, tangible failures in the machinery that keeps our global society functioning, all triggered by a single, beautiful, and terrifying new addition to our world. This isn't a scenario that would unfold over geological epochs or even centuries. The initial transformation of our world would be shockingly swift. The natural timescale for planetary change, measured in millions of years, would be compressed into a matter of days, perhaps even hours. The moment the rings coalesce, their shadow would begin its inexorable march across the surface, a new form of twilight plunging entire continents into a semi-darkness they were never designed to endure. The sky would cease to be a simple canvas of blue and black, becoming a complex, dynamic display of arcs, shadows, and ethereal light. This temporal reframing is crucial. We would not have generations to adapt, but mere moments to react to a planet fundamentally different from the one we were born on. The chain reaction begins with light, a simple change that triggers a cascade of complex, interconnected events. The first effects are subtle, almost aesthetic. A brighter, more luminous night sky, and spectacularly elongated sunrises and sunsets that paint the heavens in unfamiliar colors. But these initial, almost poetic changes are merely the prelude to more profound and disruptive consequences. The later impacts are not subtle at all, as altered sunlight patterns begin to systematically dismantle established climate norms. By the end of this rapid transition, the world still functions, but it operates under an entirely new set of physical laws. Humanity would find itself inhabiting a planet that is both familiar and profoundly alien, a world forever defined by the silent, shimmering bands that now encircle it. To comprehend the scale of this transformation, we must first understand the object now dominating our sky. The rings wouldn't be a solid, singular structure, but a colossal, spinning disk of countless individual particles. Mostly water ice, rocky material, dust. This is not a small addition. A system comparable to Saturn's would have a mass trillions of times greater than all of humanity's creations combined. If we gathered all that material into one sphere, it would form a moon over 400 kilometers in diameter. This immense collection of orbiting debris wouldn't be static. It would exist in a state of constant, dynamic equilibrium, governed by Earth's gravity, and the complex interplay of the particles themselves, forming distinct bands and gaps across the heavens. The location of these rings is critical. They would form directly above the equator, constrained by a gravitational boundary known as the Roche limit. Any large body, a moon or a comet, that wanders too close gets torn apart by tidal forces. That's where debris settles into a stable orbiting disk. For Earth, the rings would begin at roughly 3,000 kilometers altitude and could extend outward for tens of thousands of kilometers. Far above the International Space Station, the ISS orbits at about 400 kilometers, but well within the reaches of geostationary satellites. Geostationary orbit sits near 36,000 kilometers. The composition of the rings defines their appearance and impact. Composed primarily of highly reflective water ice particles, from microscopic dust grains to chunks the size of large buildings. The system would be dazzlingly bright. Dense brightness would make them visible even during the day, a shimmering ethereal arc bisecting the blue sky. This structure introduces an immediate, permanent hazard to near-Earth space. Most particles would be locked into stable equatorial orbits, but the system would not be perfectly clean. Gravitational perturbations and occasional collisions would constantly send material spiraling inwards toward Earth's atmosphere and outwards into higher orbits. This creates a debris zone, making space travel and satellite maintenance exponentially more dangerous. Every rocket launch would have to navigate this newly formed minefield. Existing low Earth orbit satellites would face continuous threats from high-velocity impacts of stray ice and rock. A constant Kessler syndrome made manifest. The era of easy access to space would be over. The very first and most profound change for every human on the surface would be the alteration of day and night. The first sunset after the ring's formation would be an event of unprecedented and unsettling beauty. As the sun dips towards the horizon, its light would refract and scatter through the trillions of ice particles, creating a sunset that doesn't just last for minutes, but extends for hours. The sky would be painted with colors for which we have no names, but this beauty comes with a price. The clear, swift transition from day to night would be erased, replaced by a prolonged, ambiguous twilight that lingers unnaturally. This extended twilight is a direct consequence of the ring's geometry and altitude. Because they orbit high above the atmosphere, they remain illuminated long after local sunset. The light catches the icy particles and scatters it back down to the darkened surface. This isn't just a longer sunset. It's a rewriting of life's daily cues. The rings would cast their own shadow, a vast moving band that creates a new eclipse. That shadow would fall on different parts of the planet depending on time and season. For regions under it, the sun would be partially obscured, or fully obscured, even at high noon. Vast areas could be plunged into deep, chilly twilight. The drop in light and temperature would be immediate and dramatic. Imagine the American Midwest experiencing a 90% sunlight reduction for hours each day. The plains of Ukraine facing the same. Photosynthesis and crop growth would be catastrophic. The ring shadow becomes a new variable in daily life. Its path is predictable, a calculable arc shifting with the seasons. Weather forecasts would include shadowfall and shadow rise times. Solar power generation would become unreliable across entire regions, a moving zone of reduced energy input, a transient climate anomaly sweeping the globe daily, leaving chilled air and stalled growth. Just as the rings would steal the light from the day, they would gift an overabundance of it to the night. After the prolonged twilight finally fades, the night sky would not be black. For much of the year, the side of the rings facing away from the sun would still be brilliantly illuminated from the perspective of the night side of Earth. This reflected sunlight, known as ring shine, would be a spectacle of immense scale and brightness. A full, bright ring system could reflect enough sunlight to make the night sky hundreds, or even thousands, of times brighter than it is under a full moon. True darkness would become a rarity, a seasonal event limited to the times when the rings are edge-on to the sun. This perpetual milky glow would fundamentally alter the nocturnal environment. The world would be bathed in a diffuse, silvery light, bright enough to read by and to cast soft, hazy shadows. The delicate balance between predator and prey, which has been fine-tuned over eons by the cycles of moonlight, would be shattered. Nocturnal animals that rely on darkness for hunting or for hiding would find themselves dangerously exposed. Ringshine would effectively erase the stars from view for most of the planet. The familiar constellations, the faint band of the Milky Way, the fleeting streaks of meteors, all would be lost in the overwhelming glare. Professional astronomy from ground-based telescopes would become nearly impossible, blinding our scientific eyes to the universe. The human circadian rhythm, our internal body clock, is deeply synchronized with the daily cycle of light and dark. The pervasive presence of bright ringshine would disrupt sleep patterns on a global scale, potentially leading to widespread issues with insomnia, metabolic disorders, and psychological stress. We would have to adapt our homes with blackout curtains and our cities with new lighting ordinances, not to fight our own light pollution, but to fend off the incessant, invasive light of our own planet's new adornment. The night would no longer be a time of rest, but another frontier to be managed. The experience of the rings would not be uniform across the globe. It would be a function of your latitude. For someone living near the equator, the rings would be a permanent fixture directly overhead. They would appear as a thin, brilliant line bisecting the sky from east to west, a celestial highway of light. As one moves to mid-latitudes, to places like New York, Paris, or Tokyo, the view changes dramatically. Here, the rings would appear as a majestic, broad arc rising from the eastern horizon, climbing high into the sky and descending to the west. The angle of this arc would change with the seasons. In the high latitudes, near the Arctic and Antarctic circles, the rings would appear as a permanent, low-glowing band on the horizon, a perpetual false dawn. During the long polar nights, the ringshine would provide a constant source of illumination, banishing the profound darkness that defines these regions for half the year. Twice a year, during the equinoxes, the rings would be perfectly edge-on to the sun. For a few days, they would seem to almost disappear. These moments would become global events, a time when the ring's influence wanes, reminding humanity of the world that was. The initial and most brutal economic impact would be felt in the agricultural sector. The ring shadow is not just a nuisance, it is a moving blight on global food production. The reduction in sunlight and temperature would stunt the growth of staple crops like corn, wheat, and rice, slashing yields. This agricultural shortfall would trigger a global food crisis on an unprecedented scale. Global commodity markets would be thrown into chaos, with food prices soaring to astronomical levels, leading to widespread famine and social unrest. The energy sector would undergo a similarly violent restructuring. The rise of solar power as a key pillar of the green energy transition would be halted in its tracks. Vast solar farms would see their output become unreliable and drastically reduced. This would force a global scramble back towards other energy sources. Nations with access to fossil fuels, nuclear power, or geothermal energy would gain a significant economic advantage, while those that had bet heavily on a solar future would face economic ruin. Human society would be forced to adapt its most fundamental rhythms. The concept of the 9-to-5 workday, a relic of predictable daylight, would become obsolete in many regions. In areas affected by the ring shadow, work schedules would have to be split. In contrast, the perpetual ring shine at night would extend the hours of activity, blurring the lines between day and night, and leading to the emergence of 24-hour economies in cities, driven by the absence of true darkness. Our architecture and urban planning would have to be completely rethought. Buildings would be designed to maximize capture of sunlight during limited hours. Conversely, homes and public spaces would need robust blackout systems to provide refuge from sleep-disrupting ringshine. New mythologies and belief systems would arise, centered on the rings themselves. Over generations, humanity would become a different species, culturally speaking. We would be a people of the rings, our lives dictated by their light and shadow. Society would stabilize, but into a form almost unrecognizable to us today. It would be a harder, more constrained world, one where humanity has been put firmly back in its place. No longer the masters of our environment, but subjects of the vast, beautiful, and terrible celestial machine that now rules our planet. The sudden arrival of a ring system around Earth would not be an apocalypse, but a profound and permanent recalibration of our world. The chain of consequences, beginning with the simple physics of light and shadow, would cascade through every layer of the planetary system. The rings would act as a great filter, systematically dismantling the globalized, interconnected world. Our satellite network, the invisible scaffolding of modern life, would be the first casualty, ground to dust by a relentless orbital bombardment, plunging us into a new era of disconnectedness. The planet's energy budget would be fundamentally altered, initiating a gradual global cooling trend, punctuated by chaotic extreme weather. The daily passage of the ring shadow would cripple agriculture, while the constant glare of ringshine would erase true night, disrupting ecosystems and our very biology. The world would not end, but it would be reborn into a harsher, less predictable version of itself. This new equilibrium is one of constraint and adaptation. Humanity would be forced to retreat from the orbital frontier. Societies would restructure their daily lives, their economies, and their cultures. The final state is not one of ruin, but of a stark, beautiful, and demanding stability. The easy abundance of the Holocene would be a memory. In its place, manage scarcity and constant challenge, where survival depends on a keen understanding of the new sky. The human story continues on a different stage, the backdrop a constant, shimmering reminder of our fragility. The sky holds possibilities far stranger than we can imagine, and a single new variable can begin a completely different story for us all. What scenario should we explore next? Share your ideas below. You've been watching IfVerse, where imagination meets possibility. See you in our next reality.